In episode 4, I created One Checkout, an app that improves the checkout process on a shop. Customers can check out with a single click. One Checkout will manage the payment and use the Gofetch Shop API to create the orders in the shop. This episode will give you a generalized sense of the vast possibilities offered by the Shop API. The API reference is available on Goaddon.com. Here you can review what kind of requests are supported. But in this episode, I'll introduce you to the Shop API through an API interface that you can set up through the Go Explore add-on. You'll need to subscribe to Go Explore first if you haven't already done so. Since the One Checkout project isn't, let's do that. I would need to choose a subdomain for this new Go Explore enabled website. I'll choose shopapi.onecheckout.network. And since we have already covered DNS configuration in episode 2, I have adjusted my DNS records off screen to enable Go Explore to host the website. I will also create a super user for the website. But before I go to my inbox and confirm my email, I will configure the website by applying a shortcut. Shortcuts can be found from within the Shortcuts tab of any of the add-ons who are participating in them. This particular shortcut will install a few repositories on my new Go Explore enabled website. With everything now ready to go, I'll visit my inbox and confirm my super user. I would need to choose a password. And since this is a super user, I'm also required to activate two-factor authentication. This Go Explore enabled website sits on top of the same database as the Go to Us enabled website we created in episode 4. So let's follow the one account that currently exists. The shortcut I applied earlier installed a few repositories that, amongst others, created the webshop's menu entry, through which I can access the Shop API. This interface presents me with all of the options that are available specifically for PrestaShop. The One Checkout app will need this method in particular that requests the shop to create an order. But today I'll cover the Shop API more broadly. I'll create a product, create a customer, and let the customer order the new product. Finally, I will process the order. Inside the Products tab, let's open the method that requests the shop to create a product. The interface provides you with the comments for the specific e-commerce platform. While the Shop API enables a unified integration procedure between your app and different e-commerce platforms, you as an app developer would still need to deal with the different limitations of the individual e-commerce platform. Mostly, it's a question of which attributes a specific e-commerce platform is capable of processing. And to help answering that question, the interface lets you replace the default payload with a selection of payloads trimmed down for the specific e-commerce platform. For every e-commerce platform you choose to support, you would need to assess if your goals can still be met under these constraints. Today, I'll create a product named Go Long Shoes, a title you may recognize from episode 4. Initially, I'll create it with a single variant XS. When creating products, I have the option to assign it to a number of categories. To know which categories are available for me to choose, I will tap to Categories and make a request to the Shop API. It seems currently only the Home category exists. It has the internal ID of 2. Gofetch has already transferred the category data to my database, so I can also see the category here on my Go to Us enabled website. As with any other MongoDB database document, this category has a document ID, which I will now copy, because I'd like to make it the parent category of the new category that I'll create through the Shop API in a moment. We can start off by trimming down the payload. Shoes seems like a fitting name for the category, so my only modification in the payload is to paste in the document ID of the Home category as parent ID. Needing only to reference document IDs from your own database abstracts a lot of complexity. It allows you to work with internal data only, even though you're manipulating data in external systems. The shop confirms the creation of the category, and the result is included in the response from the shop. Gofetch will make sure to transfer the new category to the database, but to save time, we will not find its document ID. Instead, we'll copy the ID that was generated by the shop and tab back to products. We'll use the copied ID to bypass the OneCheckout database. Under normal circumstances, the Shop API translates the document ID into the ID that is recognized by the shop. But here we choose to provide it directly. Because we are bypassing the database, we need to change the key from ID to remote ID. Let's try and create the product. It seems an error was raised by the shop. As an app developer, you will face situations where a specific attribute needs to match a set of predefined options that are unique to the shop. In this case, the shop has 3 different VAT classes that you can choose from. In situations like this, you need to enable the merchant to provide you with the necessary configurations. But for now, I will choose the VAT class with the ID 4. This time, when I submit, the product is created. Just as we can create products, we can also update them. Gofetch has probably already transferred the product data to the OneCheckout database, but we can update it without knowing its document ID. It's more complicated though, because different e-commerce platforms require you to provide different identifiers. PrestaShop requires this one, so let's copy it and go to the update method. The Shop API expects a document ID, but I can only provide it with the custom identifier. So I'll have to ask the Shop API to bypass the database and pass my custom identifier to the shop. Instead of only trimming the payload, I will cut it down to a single attribute, description 1. I'll change its value and attempt to update it. Seems it was indeed updated. If we visit the Go to Us enabled website and navigate to products, we'll see that Gofetch has transferred the product data to the OneCheckout database. We can also find the product for sale in the shop in the size XS. This product variation exists as a variant in the OneCheckout database. Let's add one more. This time we can copy the document ID of the product and pass it to the Shop API. We'll find the create variant method and paste in the product's document ID. The trimmed payload looks good, except I don't want to provide separate images for the variant. Let's submit the request. From the looks of the response, seems it went well. Back in the shop, we can refresh the product page and confirm that the shoe is now also available in XL. If we refresh the OneCheckout website, we'll also see that one more variant has emerged. Let's visit the first variant we created and copy its document ID. We are going to need it when we create the order. We'll first trim the payload and then find the block where we can specify the variants that should be included in the order. Here we'll replace the placeholder ID with the ID we just copied. You don't need to specify the name or the price. We can find payment and delivery methods in the database as well, except for some e-commerce platforms. Those would not be registered in the database until at least one order has used it. Since this is a presentation of the Shop API, let's not rely too much on the one checkout database, but instead find some payment and delivery methods in the most recent orders. Since you can search by different parameters, such as date and order number, there may be use cases where you don't really need orders to be transferred to your own database at all. You would rather pull them from the Shop API as you need them. The response will have the same structure regardless what e-commerce software is running the specific shop. In the response, we can see the same information as we had in the database: a delivery method with the ID 6 and a payment method with the ID PS wire payment. I will copy one and memorize the other. Back in the Orders tab, we'll insert them. But since we are not referencing document IDs, we would need to change the keys from ID to remote ID. We will not specify a status ID, but instead let the shop use its default value. We will need to choose a country though for the shipping and billing address. Those two can be found both in the database and in the Shop API. But since the shop uses ISO standard country codes, I can pretty much guess the remote ID on this one. It's often possible to apply pre-configured discount codes, but I can also choose a discount amount, which I will do for this order. The last association I need is the customer. Almost all e-commerce platforms allow orders to be created without an explicit association with an existing customer. But PrestaShop specifically requires one. This is yet another example of how you as an app developer will occasionally need to implement platform-specific routines in order to achieve broad compatibility. Let's try and find the customer through the Shop API instead of the database. Most e-commerce platforms allow you to search for customers based on email addresses, but will instead pull all customers ever registered. The response will be similar in structure across e-commerce platforms. Since our customer does not exist, let's create one. As usual, I will trim the payload and associate the customer's address with the same country as the order. Let's submit the request. At first attempt, an error is raised because this country apparently does not have provinces. Yet another example of a case-by-case limitation that your app would need to tolerate. Different limitations for different countries. One more error to address. The group must be chosen from a set of predefined options that are unique to the shop. For this customer, I'm gonna choose number 1. Once we've removed the province, we can submit the request again. The shop returns the customer ID of 28, while Gofetch will make sure to transfer the customer to the one checkout database. We will not spend time finding the ID of the created document. Instead, we'll copy the returned ID. This might actually also be the preferred design choice in an app that needs to create customers and orders in the same session. Because even though data from most e-commerce platforms are transferred back to your database within seconds, this may be too long of a wait. So back in the Orders tab, I will not provide an ID, but instead a remote ID with the value I just copied. Since we know from our customer creation attempt that the chosen country does not have provinces, I will remove it from both billing and shipping address. Let's create the order. Seems it was yet another success, and at first glance, the order looks good. This time, we'll go through the trouble of finding the transferred order data in the one checkout database. The initial status seems a bit out of touch with the actual situation, so maybe we should have provided a status. We can change it through one of the post-processing methods, so let's copy the document ID of the order. Available statuses are in your database, but since this is a Shop API demo, I'll show you how to find them through the Shop API. Number 16 was the one we used in the previous episode, and we could change it with the update status request. But in the interest of time, I will go straight ahead and ship the order through the create shipment method. The post-processing of an order is probably where the different e-commerce platforms differ the most, and where even shops running on the same platform can differ. But to you, it would mostly be a matter of which of these methods to apply and in which order. Since I have the document ID of the order in my clip holder, I can paste it into the create shipment method. For PrestaShop specifically, I cannot connect a shipment to a subset of order lines, which will be apparent when I trim the payload. Since I don't know what status would be appropriate for this action, we'll remove the block and let PrestaShop choose its default shipped status. The response looks good, and it seems status 4 was the correct one. But it's not necessarily true that a credit card transaction was captured. In this demo, for instance, no payment cards were involved. Especially for open source systems like PrestaShop, Magento, and WooCommerce, it depends a lot on the individual shop implementation. If we revisit the order page, we'll see that the status has changed in the one checkout database. Maybe later on, if the customer decides to return the order, we can register this as well. But let's instead try and create a new order and then cancel it. We've already prepared the payload for creating orders, so I guess we can submit the same request one more time. When canceling the order, instead of finding the order in the database, we'll just copy the order number and head to the cancel method. Here we can insert the order number and ask the Shop API to bypass the database. We are going to trim the payload and let PrestaShop choose its default status for cancelled orders. The shop confirms that the order was indeed cancelled. To enable future purchases, let's wrap up this episode by visiting the Variants tab and increasing the stock count of the XS shoe variant. Some e-commerce platforms will allow you to use the update method for this. Others have enabled the change stock method. We can grab the document ID of the variant by following this link from the order line of our first order. After copying the document ID and inserting it, we have two options. We can change the stock count, or we can overwrite it entirely. We'll choose the latter and submit. The stock count immediately changes. The old stock was 0, the new stock is 1. As always, Gofetch makes sure to keep the database up to date. This concludes the Shop API rundown. The next episode is a technical step-by-step guide for developers who want to embed the Gofetch interface into your own application.